The taxi floated gently through the streets as I tried to remember exactly when I had lost control of my life. The taxi rolled down the wet streets like a boat on black water. Outside the window, gray houses stretched endlessly like a garland. Identical, sleepy, indifferent. I sat in the back seat, tracing invisible lines on the fogged-up glass with my fingers, as if I could find my way back to the moment when everything started to fall apart. Today is not a day for explanations. Today is a day for verdicts. Verdicts not for her. For myself. I tried to recall. When was the first time I felt the world around me cracking like an old mirror? There had been signs. Small ones, almost imperceptible. An empty smile when I spoke of my dreams. The scent of someone else's perfume on her coat. Too sweet, too bright for an ordinary trip to the store. A fleeting foreignness in her voice when she called my name, as if recalling it with effort. I wanted to believe it was just exhaustion, just autumn, just something that would pass. But something inside me woke up. Something old and familiar, the fear of being unwanted. I didn't ask her directly. I hired a detective. Not to expose her. To convince myself I was wrong. When he brought me the folder with his reports, I didn't feel anger. I felt emptiness. Meetings at cafes, fleeting touches, strange dinners. Everything was laid out before me, yet none of it felt real, like a bad play performed without rehearsal. For a moment, I even thought, maybe this is a test? Maybe she's doing it on purpose so I would learn to trust. But no. True betrayal isn't found in kisses or in secret messages. It lives in the silence where your name no longer exists. It lives in how easily you can be forgotten. Now the folder rests on my lap. Heavy, cold, like an anchor I had chosen for myself. I'm not carrying evidence of her lies. I'm carrying proof of my own naivety. The taxi stopped at a red light. The crimson glow flooded the cabin like blood. I caught my reflection in the window. Tired, unfamiliar, lost. The end of illusions doesn't come with a roar. It whispers. And only those who have stopped believing in fairy tales can hear that whisper. When everything seems too perfect, that's already a mistake. She laughed at my worries lightly, carelessly, as if they were about nothing at all. Her laughter was bright but distant, like music playing behind a wall. Beautiful, but not meant for me. You're imagining things, she said, gently touching my hand. A warm palm, a familiar smile. Everything was just right. Too right. I wanted to believe. I wanted to cling to that normalcy, the way a drowning man clings to a piece of wreckage. Because the alternative was even worse than pain. To admit that the world I had built had cracked long before I noticed. But intuition doesn't listen to persuasion. It sits deep inside you like a splinter under the skin. One you know is there even when you try to forget. At first, it was the little things. Work trips appearing out of nowhere. I need to rush to a meeting. I nodded, wished her luck, watched her silhouette disappear behind the door. But somewhere deep inside, a strange certainty grew. She wasn't going where she said she was. And she wasn't going alone. Then came the strange messages. Foreign names. No explanations. No jokes, no shared stories, nothing of what people in love usually share. Just cold facts. I started seeing patterns where once there were only coincidences. She forgot to wear her wedding ring more and more often. Her hair smelled of a place that wasn't my home, wasn't my life. I tried to convince myself it was paranoia, that I had changed, that my exhaustion was conjuring up ghosts where there were none. But every sideways glance, every pause between a question and her answer cut sharper than any knife. In the evenings, I would sit in the living room, listening to the faint rustle of her phone upstairs, watching as the screen would light up, casting the room in a light that didn't belong to me. Sometimes I would catch myself counting her steps. 1, 2 to the bedroom. 3, 4 to the bathroom. 5, 6 a stop. A hesitation. A whisper. It was then I first understood. The truth doesn't always come crashing down like an avalanche. It doesn't break into your house with screaming and scandal. It simply looks at you through the foggy glass of your doubts. It waits patiently until you are too tired to keep pretending. And one day, when you can't lie to yourself any longer, you will see everything. If the play is badly staged, it means it was rushed. The detective threw the folder onto the table with a weary kind of irritation, as if he himself was tired of what he had uncovered. "It's all too easy," he said, unable to hide the skepticism in his voice. The kind of tired skepticism that comes from dealing with human deceit too often. I opened the folder slowly. The photographs spilled out like a fan. Dinners by candlelight, hands brushing against each other, tilted heads and trusting smiles. Late-night walks too serene for two people who were just friends. I stared at each detail like I was analyzing a crime scene. It was all too perfect, too rehearsed. The shadows fell across their faces just so, highlighting the tenderness of the moment. The touches were just ambiguous enough to suggest intimacy. Their eyes lingered on each other just a little longer than friendship would allow. I could feel the fakeness seeping from the photographs, as clearly as the cheap perfume stinking up a smoky bar, as if someone had staged these scenes on purpose, as if they wanted me to see them. I didn't know why, but something deep inside me tightened, like a string pulled taut under a finger. Something didn't add up. Real infidelity is messy, chaotic, irrational. There's no neat choreography, no casual ease. Real affairs don't pose for cameras. They hide in half-lit motels, in hurried touches in parking lots, in clumsy mistakes and panicked glances. Not in beautiful dinners under open skies. I placed the photographs back into the folder, feeling a growing heaviness in my chest. Not anger, not pain. A sensation that I was no longer just a spectator of the play. I was a part of it. That someone, quietly, had closed the curtains behind me. That I was sitting in the front row, watching a badly acted play about my own life. And the scariest part was, I still didn't know which scene I had been assigned the leading role in. When you stop believing in words, only actions remain. The folder of photographs lay at the edge of the table, like a trap someone had carelessly set. I never opened it again. I didn't need the proof anymore. I was breathing it. When someone lies, they hope you'll believe their words. When someone loses respect for you, they hope you'll stop asking questions. When someone no longer fears you, they simply act. And then only actions remain. I ordered the surveillance to continue. Not on the surface. Not on those pitiful performances for tourists. Deeper, quieter, more invisibly. And there, in the cracks of her schedule, in the pauses between business meetings and fitness sessions, the second stage was revealed. Not restaurants, not strolls through parks, the fitness club, the dim light of fluorescent lamps, the stifling smell of sweat, metal, and cheap deodorant thickening the air. That's where she relieved stress. That's where her smile was different. Not strained, not tired, but alive. Real. I saw him in the first photos. The trainer. Not the man from the stage dates. Someone else. Someone real. His movements were confident and smooth, like a predator who knows he owns the territory. He laughed the way people laugh when they are used to getting everything they want. Without asking. Without apologizing. And her face next to him. At first, I couldn't quite understand what it was that stabbed so sharply into my heart. Not romance. Not love. Certainty. Belonging. She looked at him the way people look at a victor. At someone they're willing to give themselves to, because they no longer know how to defend themselves. His hand slid down her back, casually, without hesitation. The way you touch something that already belongs to you. I stared at those images for a long time. Too long. The world around me slowly drained of color. The white walls of the office turning a dirty gray. The air thickening, as if someone had dissolved dust into it. And then I understood. All those staged dinners, the restaurants, the photos, they were a mask. A distraction. Someone wanted me to see one betrayal so I wouldn't notice the real one. So I would burn my rage on cheap actors while the real scene unfolded backstage. They wanted me to feel such an overwhelming need for revenge that I would stumble, that I would make a mistake. Not about feelings. Not about passion. About control. About power. About a price I had already begun to pay without even realizing it. I clenched my fists until my knuckles turned white, but inside, there was no rage, only weight, as if my whole body was sinking to the bottom of a black lake where there is no light. Only knowledge, only cold, merciless clarity. And it was only the beginning. The best way to win is to make the opponent surrender by themselves. At home, she became different, tender, attentive, as if the woman I had once loved had suddenly reawakened. Sincere, caring, real. But I already knew. There was nothing real left. She was simply repeating a rehearsed script. A little too late, a little too unsure, like an actress terrified of ruining her premiere. The routine questions. How was your day? Have you eaten? Did you overwork yourself today? Affectionate glances that slid past me without ever landing. Hugs that felt too warm, too proper, like a blanket draped over a corpse. Everything looked perfect. But in her eyes, there was no longer the fear of losing me. Not the fear that comes when you lose someone you love. No. There was another fear. Deeper. Thinner. The fear that I might leave too late. The fear that I might ruin the carefully orchestrated endgame she had been building for so long. Like a chess match where the checkmate has not yet been declared, but the player already knows there are no moves left. I saw it in the small things. In the way her voice grew slightly louder when I entered the room, as if reminding me she existed. In the way she left little tokens of care, in plain sight, a prepared dinner, neatly folded shirts, a note wishing me a good day. But every gesture, every attempt to look right, was not filled with love. It was filled with urgency. As if time was slipping away and with it the chance to put the final piece into place. She was no longer afraid of being caught. She was afraid of running out of time. I saw it in her quick, tense glances when she thought I wasn't looking. In the slight tremor of her fingers when her phone vibrated somewhere in another room. She wasn't acting out love. She was acting out the role of a victim. A role she could present later. I tried. I loved. I fought. So that when it all fell apart, she could say, I did everything I could. He was the one who left. She was building an excuse for herself. And maybe for someone else, someone waiting behind the scenes, waiting for me to walk out of the story voluntarily. The best way to win is to make your opponent surrender without a fight. Without a scream. To make them lay down their arms and thank you for it. And if I hadn't known what was behind it all, I might have believed it. Almost. When you don't know who to trust, you start trusting only silence. I stopped arguing. Not because I had given up. And not because I was tired. But because words had lost all meaning. In a world where every promise was a minefield, every I love you echoed hollow, the only thing left to trust was silence. I stopped explaining where I was. Who I spoke to. What I was thinking. Why feed the beast with hopes for conversation? Every explanation became a new weapon in foreign hands. Every justification was another crack in the mirror I used to call my life. Now every move of mine was calculated. Every glance deliberate. I learned to walk through the house like it was a minefield. Quiet. Cold. Inside, silence. Outside, a polite smile. Every movement, every exchange of words was a step across an invisible chessboard. And I was no longer playing white. She thought everything was going according to plan. That I still believed. That I was still torn between suspicion and hope. And that was where my strength lay. I started collecting facts. Not feelings. Not guesses. Facts. Dates of trips that didn't match her explanations. Receipts from restaurants we supposedly had never visited. Photographs taken by other hands where her smile was clearly not meant for me. Signatures in the fitness club's visitor log. Withdrawals from her bank account at strange hours. I was building my own fortress. Quietly. Methodically. A fortress made of facts. A fortress that no scream, no tears, no desperate attempt to rewrite the past could tear down. And I made sure to keep playing my part in this whole spectacle, the role of the man they were watching, waiting for, hoping he would make a reckless mistake. A simple lunch with a female colleague at a cafe. No continuation, no story behind it, just enough for her to know that my ego was wounded. I buried my emotions deep inside like an unreliable ally. Anger. Pain. Despair. They were all still there, alive, burning, desperate for release. But I didn't let them take control. Not until the time for action came. Until then, the sword had to stay sheathed. I understood if I struck too soon, I would lose. If I allowed myself to show weakness, I would lose not just love, but my own self-respect. And so I chose the most terrifying weapon of all. Patience. Silent. Cold. Relentless. Only fools make the first move when the stakes are highest. The house smelled of coffee and lies. She continued to play her part. Breakfast smiles, casual questions, care at all the right moments. And each time I caught her efforts to maintain control, a cold smile flickered inside me. In the marriage contract signed long ago in carefree happiness, there was one thin, merciless line. Proven infidelity equals full transfer of all shared property to the faithful party. No compromises, no divisions, no polite, fair divorces. And now everything had become clear as an autumn sky after a storm. The game was not about love, not about guilt, not even about betrayal. It was about the price. Her stake to save face, mine to save dignity. She couldn't afford to be caught, which meant her mission was simple and cruel. To force me to leave first. Not to expose her, not to accuse her, but to make me surrender, to push me out of the house step by silent step. With silence, with disdain, with unspoken accusations that could not be fought, so that afterward she could say, "He left on his own. I tried everything to save us." Only fools make the first move when the stakes are highest. I sat at my desk, pretending to be busy with work when once again I heard her sigh loudly as she passed by. Saw how she deliberately left a handkerchief marked with a stranger's perfume where I could find it. How she texted someone right in front of me, no longer bothering to hide it. Each of her gestures was like a move in a chess game. Clumsy. Too obvious to be dangerous. Clearly bait. I remained silent. I let her build her version of reality, line by line, lie by lie. I let her feel like the victor. Let her believe she was still controlling the script. I gathered every piece of her performance. Photographs. Screenshots, bank statements, detailed records carefully arranged in chronological order. And the longer her theater dragged on, the deeper she wove herself into her own trap. I was building the case against her as slowly and inevitably as nightfall. She thought she was winning, but it was only a lull. The final move would be mine. Some wars are won in silence. The taxi stopped at the curb with a weary sigh, like a runner collapsing at the finish line. I didn't get out immediately. I sat there for a few seconds, watching the rare passers-by hurrying by, bundled up in scarves. The street was damp, the cold crept through my clothes and slid down my collar like icy fingers. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of wet asphalt, gasoline, and something else, tension, almost tangible. It was time. I paid the driver, opened the door, and stepped into this new, alien day. My footsteps echoed against the empty tiles. The courthouse towered above me, grim, unmoving like a stone fortress. No promises of justice. No guarantees of fairness. Just doors ready to swallow anyone still naive enough to believe in illusions. Inside, the air was thick with people. The dim light from the lamps cut sharply through the gloom, casting long, shaky shadows across the floor. The air smelled of cheap coffee, paper, and other people's fear, heavy and sticky like mist. The rustle of documents. The muted hum of cell phones on vibrate. Short, clipped phrases like battlefield commands. I moved slowly, letting the noise wash over me like water. And then I saw her. She stood a little apart from the crowd, not alone, but somehow isolated, as if she had deliberately chosen the spot where she would be most visible. A black dress clung to her figure perfectly, strict, restrained. Her hair was neatly styled. Her makeup barely there, a delicate effort to highlight natural fatigue and hidden pain. The face of a victim. Her posture was calculated. Hands folded in front of her, eyes lowered, shoulders slightly slumped, just enough to evoke sympathy but not pity. Only one thing gave her away. Her hands. Thin, delicate fingers clutched the folder of documents too tightly. The knuckles were pale. And every now and then she would cast quick, restless glances across the hall. Searching. Waiting. She was waiting for me. Not with hope. With calculation. I watched her long and silent. And for the first time in all this time, I realized the woman I had once dreamed of a future with was no longer standing in front of me. There was only a stranger. A figure in someone else's game. Her entire role fell apart under the harsh lights, too rehearsed, too perfect to be born of real pain. Like an actress who no longer believes in her own script but is forced to finish the performance anyway. And I no longer felt anger. Only a strange, heavy calm. I walked past her without slowing down, without meeting her eyes. The way you walk past an advertisement at a bus stop, you notice it, but you don't stop. And in that moment, I understood. Some wars are not won in battles. Some buildings don't collapse from explosions, but from their own weight. The courtroom buzzed with a barely audible whisper like a hive before a storm. I sat still. Silent. Patient. Time stretched. Every second rang in my head like a drop of water falling in an empty torture chamber. At first, everything went according to her script. When our lawyer began reading the transcripts of the messages, she simply lowered her gaze. She smiled through tears, that same pitiful smile people wear when pleading for mercy from strangers. When the bank records were presented, payments for restaurants, hotels, trips, all coinciding with her so-called business trips, she shook her head quietly. As if it were all just a mistake. As if everything could still somehow be explained away. The lies died slowly, page by page. But she held on. For a while. I could see it. How her fingers gripped the hem of her dress tighter and tighter. How her shoulders jerked with the effort of holding herself together. How her eyes clung desperately to every phrase our lawyer spoke, searching for something, anything to grasp onto. But a courtroom is not a place for hope. When the real photographs were laid out on the table, taken on the very day she was supposedly at a business meeting, time seemed to stop. The images were precise. Cold. Merciless. There she was, in sportswear, laughing in a small cafe near the fitness club. There he was, the trainer, sitting too close, his hand resting casually on her thigh. And then the record from the motel on the outskirts. The check-in and check-out times. The dates. The very dates listed in her calendar as business trips. She didn't cry. She didn't resist. She simply froze. As if someone had switched off all the sound, all the light, all the life inside her. Her back bent under the weight of a truth that could no longer be denied. And in that moment I understood. The play was over. Even for her. There was no point in smiling through tears anymore. No point in pretending not to understand. All the roles had been played. All the lines spoken. All the stage sets torn down. Before me stood no actress. No deceiver. Not even an enemy. Just an empty shell. The remains of what once seemed real. She lowered her head. And the building she had so carefully constructed from lies, from manipulation, from my own blind hope began to collapse. Not from a scream. Not from a blow. But from its own weight. A victory without joy is still a victory. The judge lowered his eyes to the papers, running his finger across them like a conductor before the final note. A heavy silence filled the courtroom, the kind that presses harder on the chest than any scream. I stood upright, not breathing, listening as the words cut through the air. The contract. The facts. The verdict. The judge's voice was steady, emotionless, like a hammer striking cold metal. All terms of the marriage contract were declared valid. All evidence was accepted. All jointly acquired property was awarded to the faithful party. To me, the decision was final. No right of appeal. No second chance to replay the game. Everything we had built together, the house, the accounts, the memories, the life, was now legally mine. She stood in the corner, head bowed. She didn't cry. She didn't protest. And when the session ended, she was the first to leave. She didn't look back. She didn't say a word. Only the faint sound of her heels tapping on the stone floor echoed somewhere deep inside my heart, a hollow, empty sound. I didn't follow her. I stayed where I was. Alone. On the courthouse steps under the drizzling rain. The raindrops struck my face with icy pinpricks, erasing the boundaries between my skin and the air. As if the world itself wanted to wash away the remnants of the life that had ended inside those walls. Victory. Cold. Without applause. Without triumph. Only me, the gray sky, the rain, and the wet asphalt under my feet. But still victory. Because within the coldness was something new. Something I hadn't felt for many months. Something greater than revenge. Greater than justice. Freedom. Not freedom from her. Not from her betrayal. Not even from the pain. Freedom from the man I used to be. The man who once believed in fairy tales. Who was afraid to see the truth. Who clung to emptiness. I stepped into that cold, wet day slowly without rushing. Not to start a new life, but to allow the old one to finally end. And in that step there was no anger. Only silence. And for the first time in a long, long while it belonged to me.